The day I went for my pregnancy checkup, I never imagined my life would change forever. I walked into the clinic alone, just like I had done several times before. I believed it would be another normal appointment. A few tests, a quick ultrasound, and then I would go home. Instead, I walked out carrying a truth that destroyed everything I believed about my marriage. The strange part is that nobody was trying to reveal a secret. The doctor simply said one ordinary sentence. She had no idea those few words would tear my world apart. I still remember sitting on the examination table, hearing that sentence, and feeling like every sound around me disappeared. In less than a minute, the future I had imagined was gone. Looking back now, I realize that moment did not actually begin in that doctor's office. It started years earlier when I made the biggest decision of my life. I was raised in a traditional Amish community. It was a simple life, very different from the modern world. We had no electricity in our house. We traveled with horses and buggies instead of cars. I wore handmade dresses every day, and I covered my hair because that was part of our way of life. Many people think life in an Amish community is only difficult, but that is not true. There were many things I loved. Life moved slowly. Families stayed close. Everyone worked hard with their hands, and neighbors helped each other without expecting anything in return. It was peaceful in many ways. Still, as I grew older, I began to dream about a different future. I wanted the chance to make my own decisions. I wanted to experience a world I had only heard about from outsiders. Those dreams stayed hidden inside me for years. Everything changed when I met the man I will call Daniel. That is not his real name, but it is the name I will use. Daniel was not Amish. He worked as an electrician and often visited a property beside our family's farm. Every morning, as he arrived for work, he would smile and wave at me from a distance. At first, that was all. We never spoke. It became a quiet routine that lasted for many months. One day, he finally walked over while I was selling fresh eggs at a small roadside stand. He asked if the eggs were collected that morning. It was such a simple question. Our entire conversation lasted less than a minute. Yet something about the way he looked at me stayed in my mind. He did not see me as someone trapped inside a role. He looked at me as if I were simply another person with dreams, opinions, and a future. Nobody had ever made me feel that way before. Over time, we found chances to talk more often. Every conversation made me believe that there was another life waiting beyond everything I had ever known. Eventually, I made the hardest choice of my life. I left my Amish community. Many people think leaving home only means moving to another place. For me, it meant losing almost everything. I left behind my parents, my brothers and sisters, my friends, and the community that had shaped every part of my childhood. I stopped speaking Pennsylvania Dutch every day because nobody around me used it anymore. The hardest part was being shunned. My family believed I had abandoned the faith and our traditions. For years, my own mother refused to sit at the same table with me. Birthdays passed without phone calls. Holidays came and went without seeing my family. It felt like the people I loved had disappeared from my life overnight. Even though it hurt deeply, I believed my sacrifice was worth it because I loved Daniel. A few years later, we got married. The first 2 years of our marriage felt wonderful. I had so much to learn about the modern world, and Daniel was patient through every mistake. He taught me how to drive a car without being afraid. He explained how bank cards worked because I had never used one before. He helped me understand smartphones, online shopping, and everyday technology that most people grow up using. Whenever I felt embarrassed for asking simple questions, he never laughed at me. Instead, he encouraged me until I became more confident. During those years, I truly believed I had found the right person. He became my family because I had given up my old one. But sometime during our 3rd year together, little things started changing. Nothing happened all at once. It began with longer workdays. Daniel started coming home much later than usual. Sometimes his phone would ring during dinner, and instead of answering inside the house, he would step outside, even when it was freezing cold. I noticed it, but I ignored the feeling in my stomach. Soon another habit appeared. Every night he placed his phone under his pillow before going to sleep. He had never done that before. Whenever I asked who had called, he always had a simple answer. It was work. A customer needed help. Someone had an emergency. Every explanation sounded reasonable, so I accepted them. The truth is, I wanted to believe him. When you leave behind your entire family to build a future with one person, admitting something is wrong becomes almost impossible. If your marriage fails, you start wondering whether you sacrificed everything for nothing. So instead of asking difficult questions, I convinced myself that married life simply changes over time. Then another surprise arrived. I found out I was pregnant. The news filled me with happiness. When I told Daniel, he hugged me tightly and smiled in a way that seemed completely genuine. He said he had secretly hoped we would have a baby soon. Hearing those words made me believe our relationship was becoming stronger again. I imagined that our child would bring us even closer. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the future. But almost immediately, something strange started happening. Every time I scheduled a pregnancy appointment, Daniel suddenly became unavailable. Sometimes an important customer needed him. Sometimes another electrician called asking for help. Sometimes he remembered a meeting at the last minute. At first, I thought nothing of it. Many husbands are busy, especially during the early months of pregnancy. Still, after several appointments, I realized it was becoming a pattern. It no longer felt like bad timing. It felt like he was avoiding the clinic itself. By the time my fourth appointment arrived, I stopped asking him to come with me. I told myself I was trying to make life easier for him. Deep inside, I think I was trying to protect myself from hearing another excuse. So one quiet Tuesday morning, I drove to my routine pregnancy checkup completely alone, believing it would be another ordinary day. I had no idea that before I returned home, one unexpected conversation would uncover a secret that had been hiding in my marriage for nearly a year. The waiting room felt unusually quiet that morning. I sat alone, scrolling through my phone while waiting for my name to be called. Instead of feeling lonely, I actually felt calm. For a little while, I did not have to think about the distance that had slowly grown between Daniel and me. I could simply focus on the tiny life growing inside me. After several minutes, a nurse opened the door and called my name with a warm smile. Everything seemed completely normal. She checked my blood pressure, asked the usual questions about how I had been feeling, and entered my answers into the computer. We even joked about how difficult it was to find a comfortable sleeping position during pregnancy. Then something changed. She looked at the screen for a few seconds longer than expected. Her smile faded. She frowned slightly, looked back at me, and then returned her attention to the computer. It lasted only a moment, but I noticed it. She quietly apologized and said she wanted to double-check something before the doctor came in. I assumed it was an insurance issue or maybe a mistake in my medical records. Those things happen all the time, so I did not think much about it. The nurse stepped outside. 5 minutes passed, then another 5. Sitting alone in that examination room suddenly felt uncomfortable. The paper on the exam table made a loud crinkling sound every time I moved, and the silence seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute. I started wondering if something was wrong with my baby. When the doctor finally entered the room, she wasn't carrying her usual cheerful expression. Instead of preparing the ultrasound equipment right away, she sat down across from me with my file in her hands. That immediately caught my attention. She looked at me carefully before speaking. "There is something I would like to confirm before we begin," she said gently. I nodded. She asked if my husband's name was Daniel. I answered yes without thinking twice. After all, she already knew that information from my records. She looked back at the file, paused for another moment, then said something I never expected to hear. She explained that another pregnant patient in their system was listed under the same insurance policy. At first, I assumed she meant a family member, maybe a relative, maybe someone whose paperwork had been entered incorrectly. Then she continued. According to their records, that woman was also listed as Daniel's spouse. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. The words made no sense. I stared at her without saying anything. Finally, I managed to answer. That can't be right. I'm his wife. The doctor remained calm. She did not accuse anyone. She simply explained that mistakes can sometimes happen with insurance records, which was why she wanted to verify the information before saying anything else. She even apologized for bringing it up, but she also admitted that both names appeared under the same policy. Both women were registered as spouses. Both had pregnancy records. Both were connected to Daniel. I felt like all the air had disappeared from the room. My heart was beating so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. Part of me wanted to laugh because the idea sounded impossible. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was an old record. Maybe someone else's information had somehow been attached to our account. Maybe Daniel had been helping a relative with insurance paperwork. My mind created one excuse after another. Anything except the obvious answer. The doctor noticed how shocked I looked. She gently asked whether I wanted to continue with the appointment or reschedule for another day. I looked down at my stomach. No matter what was happening, my baby still deserved this appointment. So I quietly told her to continue. A few minutes later, the ultrasound began. The room became silent again. The only sound came from the machine beside me. Then I saw my baby on the screen. A tiny heartbeat flashed over and over again. For a brief moment, nothing else existed. Not the strange insurance records, not Daniel, not the confusing conversation. Only my daughter. Watching that little heartbeat reminded me why I had to stay strong. No matter what happened next, she needed me. When the appointment ended, I thanked the doctor as politely as I could. I walked out of the clinic without crying. People often imagine heartbreaking moments as loud emotional scenes. Mine wasn't like that. I simply walked through the parking lot, unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared through the windshield. I did not start the engine. I could not. Almost 45 minutes passed while I sat there trying to understand what had just happened. I replayed every word the doctor had spoken. Every possible explanation ran through my mind. I wanted to believe there had been some kind of mistake, because if there wasn't, then my entire marriage had been built on a lie. By the time I drove home, I had made one important decision. I would not confront Daniel. Not yet. If I accused him without proof and the records were somehow wrong, I would destroy our marriage over nothing. But if the records were correct, then I needed to know everything before saying a single word. That evening, Daniel came home as if it were any other day. He kissed my forehead. He asked how the appointment had gone. He smiled when I told him the baby looked healthy. I smiled back. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. For the first time since we met, I looked into his eyes and wondered whether I actually knew the man standing in front of me. He went to bed without noticing anything unusual. I barely slept that night. Every question circled through my mind again and again. The next morning, while Daniel was taking a shower, I opened our insurance account online. It only took a few minutes. There, hidden among the policy details, was another dependent. A woman's name I had never seen before. Relationship. Spouse. The date she had been added to the policy stopped me cold. 11 months earlier. Almost exactly the same time Daniel had started hiding his phone, working late, and missing every pregnancy appointment. At that moment, the doctor's words stopped feeling like a mistake. They started feeling like the beginning of a truth I had been refusing to see for almost a year. I closed the laptop slowly and sat at the kitchen table without moving. The screen in front of me showed everything I had hoped I would never find. The woman's name was still there. The relationship status clearly said spouse. There was no typing mistake, no missing information, and no simple explanation that could make it disappear. Oddly enough, I did not break down. I expected myself to cry or panic, but instead, I felt strangely calm. Sometimes the truth is so overwhelming that your mind protects you by becoming completely quiet. That morning, I made a promise to myself. I would not accuse Daniel until I knew the whole story. If he had been lying to me, then I wanted facts instead of arguments. I wanted answers that could not be explained away with excuses. Over the next several days, I became someone I never imagined I would be. I quietly started gathering information. I searched public records online. I checked addresses connected to Daniel's name. I looked through documents I had never paid attention to before. Little by little, the pieces began fitting together. One search led me to another address. It was a rental house less than 15 minutes away from where we lived. I had never heard Daniel mention it. At first, I wondered if it belonged to a customer or maybe one of his employees, but something inside me kept pushing forward. I searched his name again, using a slightly different spelling. This time, social media profiles started appearing. One account immediately caught my attention. The profile was private, but several public pictures were still visible. I opened the first photo, then the second, then another. My hands started shaking. There was Daniel, smiling, standing beside a young pregnant woman. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders as if they had been together for years. The picture was taken during a baby shower. Family members and friends surrounded them, laughing and celebrating. Everyone looked completely comfortable. No one looked confused. No one acted as if they were hiding a secret. It looked like a normal family celebrating their first child. I stared at those photographs for a long time. The woman's name was Callie. She looked happy. She looked completely unaware that another woman existed, just like I had been. As I looked through the pictures, I noticed the dates. Based on her pregnancy, she was about 1 month further along than I was. That realization made my stomach twist. Daniel had started 2 families almost at the same time. Neither of us knew about the other. I kept searching. Every new discovery made the situation worse. There were photos from restaurants, pictures from holidays, a birthday celebration, even simple everyday moments. Daniel appeared relaxed in every image. He smiled exactly the same way he smiled in our family photos. Nothing about his face suggested guilt. It was as if he had somehow divided his life into 2 separate worlds. One belonged to me, the other belonged to her. Neither world knew the other existed. Then I found something that explained why everything had stayed hidden for so long. Legal documents showed a slightly different version of Daniel's full name. He had used his middle name differently on certain paperwork. It was similar enough to avoid attracting attention, but different enough to keep records from connecting immediately. I could hardly believe what I was reading. This was not one careless mistake. This had required planning, months of planning. Every late night at work, every missed appointment, every hidden phone call, every excuse suddenly made sense. I leaned back in my chair and looked around our kitchen. Nothing had changed. The coffee machine was still sitting on the counter. His jacket still hung near the front door. Our wedding picture still rested on the shelf. Everything looked exactly the same, yet none of it felt real anymore. I started thinking about the last year. There had been signs, so many signs. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the way he always kept his phone close, the sudden business trips, the endless work emergencies. I remembered asking him once if everything was okay. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me I worried too much. I believed him. Not because the explanation was convincing, because believing him was easier than accepting the truth. When someone becomes your entire world, your mind works hard to protect that world. It finds reasons to ignore obvious warning signs. It creates excuses that make impossible situations feel normal. I had done exactly that. I wasn't blind. I had simply been afraid. Afraid that if I admitted something was wrong, I would also have to admit I had sacrificed my family for someone who never truly valued me. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. 11 days passed after my doctor's appointment. By then, I had collected everything I needed: insurance records, the second address, photographs, public documents. There was nothing left to question. I chose Sunday evening. Daniel had just finished dinner and was sitting comfortably in the living room. I asked him to join me at the kitchen table. My voice stayed calm. I placed the printed papers in front of him one by one. First, the insurance information, then the address, then the photographs. Finally, I placed the picture of him standing beside Callie during the baby shower. He looked down at every page. He did not rush. He did not panic. He simply stared at the papers. The silence lasted so long that I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I waited for him to speak. I expected denial. I expected anger. I expected excuses. Maybe even lies. Instead, he quietly took a deep breath. Then he looked directly into my eyes. The first words that came out of his mouth changed everything. He admitted it, without arguing, without denying a single piece of evidence. His confession was shorter than I ever imagined, and somehow it hurt even more because of how simple it was. He looked at me for several long seconds before finally speaking. There was no panic in his face, no desperate attempt to deny what I had found, no anger, no surprise. He simply looked tired. Then, in a quiet voice, he admitted everything. His explanation was only a few words. He said he never knew how to choose between the two of us. That was it. No apology, no promise to fix things, no explanation for months of lies. Just those simple words. He admitted that instead of making a difficult decision, he had chosen the easier path. He had allowed two women to build their futures around him at the same time. He let both of us believe we were his only family. For months, he moved between two different homes. He celebrated two pregnancies. He made plans with two families. And somehow he expected both lives to continue without ever colliding. I listened without interrupting. The strange thing was that I no longer felt angry. That emotion had already disappeared while I was gathering evidence. Now I simply felt empty. I looked around the kitchen where we had shared hundreds of meals together. Every memory suddenly felt different. The laughter, the conversations, the dreams we had planned together. None of them meant what I thought they meant. I quietly stood up. Without raising my voice, I told him I was leaving. He asked if we could talk again the next day. I shook my head. There was nothing left to discuss. Trust had already disappeared. Without trust, there was no marriage left to save. Over the next 4 days, I packed only the things I truly needed. Baby clothes, medical papers, a few personal belongings. Everything else stayed behind. Every box I packed felt like closing another chapter of my life. Finding somewhere to stay was not easy. I had left my Amish community years earlier. Because of that decision, I no longer had the family support most people rely on during difficult times. One of my coworkers offered me a spare bedroom. Without asking many questions, she simply told me I could stay as long as I needed. Her kindness reminded me that family is not always connected by blood. Sometimes strangers show more compassion than people you have known your entire life. The weeks that followed were incredibly difficult. There were meetings with lawyers, medical appointments, paperwork, long conversations about custody and finances. Every day seemed to bring another challenge. But through all of it, one thought kept me moving forward. My daughter deserved a peaceful life. She deserved honesty. She deserved stability, even if creating that life meant starting over completely alone. About 6 weeks after I moved out, something happened that I never expected. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. For several seconds, I simply stared at her name. She had not called me in years. The last real conversation we had shared was before I left the Amish community. My hands were shaking as I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said she had heard about everything that had happened. News had somehow reached our old community. Even though we had lived separate lives for years, word had found its way back. Then she said something I will never forget. She told me she was sorry that the life I had chosen had brought me so much pain. She said that if I ever needed a place to rest or someone to talk to, I could come home. Those words broke something inside me. Not because I wanted to return to my old life. I didn't. That chapter had already ended. But hearing my mother's voice without anger after so many years healed a wound I believed would never close. Our relationship did not become perfect overnight. Healing rarely happens that way. Instead, we started slowly. Occasional phone calls, short conversations, then video calls, later, careful visits. Step by step, we rebuilt something that had once seemed impossible. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if losing my marriage opened the door to repairing another relationship that had been broken for years. Life has a strange way of doing that. Sometimes one painful ending quietly creates the chance for a different beginning. Today, my daughter is growing into a happy little girl. She laughs easily. She loves books, animals, and running through the park. She has no idea how close her life came to beginning inside a family built on deception. And honestly, I hope she never carries that weight. She deserves a childhood free from the mistakes adults make. People often ask me which moment changed everything. They expect me to mention the photographs, or the insurance records, or Daniel's confession. But it wasn't any of those. It was one quiet sentence spoken by a careful doctor during a routine appointment. If she had ignored that insurance record, if she had decided not to ask a simple question, I might have continued living inside that lie for much longer. That experience taught me something I will never forget. Life-changing truths rarely arrive with dramatic warnings. Most of the time, they appear quietly. A strange feeling you cannot explain. A small detail that does not seem to fit. A question someone asks without realizing its importance. Too often, we silence those moments because accepting the truth feels frightening. I know I did. For nearly a year, I saw signs that something was wrong. Late nights, hidden phone calls, missed appointments, constant excuses. Deep inside, I noticed every one of them. I simply chose not to connect them because I was afraid of what they might reveal. If there is one lesson my story has taught me, it is this. Never ignore the quiet voice inside you when something feels wrong. That voice is not always fear. Sometimes it is wisdom trying to protect you long before your mind is ready to accept reality. Although my marriage ended, my life did not. I found strength I never knew I had. I rebuilt relationships I believed were lost forever. Most importantly, I created a safe and honest future for my daughter. That future looks very different from the one I once imagined. But today, I can finally say something I could not say back then. I am at peace. Sometimes losing the life you planned is the only way to discover the life you truly deserve.